everybody. Chris Vaccaro here with another Sachem Conversation, joined by Pete McNeill, alum, coach, teacher, mentor, Sachem Hall of Famer, athlete, runner. A lot of titles for you, Coach, but I'm excited to talk about all of it today.
I wear lots of different hats. Thank you for having me on the show. This is great.
Yeah. So, I always say this is an oral history project. This is really about making sure current and future generations understand who we are as a community, what Sachem really means. To say we have a tradition of excellence is good, but I like to define what that means. I like to really put a definition to that, which comes down to dedicated people, teachers, coaches, students, administrators, community members who dedicated significant portions of their lives to making sure this is a better place, that this is a school community that matters. And so my goal is to make sure we document the history of the people who helped make the history of our community. And you're one of them. Your dad was one of them. You've been coaching for decades upon decades. You've experienced things, as a student athlete in the 70s, late 60s. I can't wait to talk about the stories of your dad coaching and teaching and some great things back in the day at Gatelot Elementary and even some of the other buildings before that people probably aren't aware of today. And
Sure.
Great storyline in your family bloodline. And the hard drives, the transcripts of these chats will get donated to the Sachem Public Library and the libraries at both Sachem North and Sachem East, again, to make sure that generations ahead have access to these conversations so they know where they live and where they come from. So, so we'll dive in. You're a product of the community. You grew up here.
Lake Ronkonkoma and then moved to Lake Grove.
Yeah, and so that's right. So you were there in Lake Grove, and the Lake Grove only started to exist in 1968 in name when it was incorporated. So you saw all those different changes. What was the community like? What was it like being a kid here?
Well, it was very, very rural, that's for sure. You still had farms around, and the house I grew up in was right off of Main Street, Connolly Drive, right by Lake Ronkonkoma. And those homes there were converted summer homes because that area had been a big resort area in the early 1900s. And as a matter of fact, my grandmother's first date with her future husband was going out to the resort of Lake Ronkonkoma and spending the day there. That was her first date. And later on, then, of course, my parents, after my dad had gotten a job working part-time at Gatelot and part-time at the Woods Avenue School, just a couple of miles away in Center Reach. This was the early 1950s, and he was commuting from Brooklyn to his two teaching jobs. And then when Sachem became a district and he got pulled right in as one of the first teachers, we moved to that small little converted little bungalow there in Lake Ronkonkoma, right near the lake.
Yeah, those beach houses, since Lake Ronkonkoma was the Hamptons before the Hamptons were something.
Exactly.
Only get so far with the type of transportation and the structure of the roads, logistically speaking. And so that's great that your family's history is part of that beach culture originally. And I think that's great that you're also settled in one of those bungalows that have such a great history, but is really being lost as houses get converted and properties are sold and things are knocked down. Some of those things are no longer here. What was the sentiment like with the schools? What was the education like from your dad's teaching perspective? And he's getting this job in this unknown community that's not yet really the Sachem we know today. It must have been eye-opening to see from the ground up.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly the mechanism of how we ended up with those two teaching jobs. Back then, you didn't have the centralized school districts that you have now. And it just worked out well. Neither building needed him full time, so it worked out well that he was working in both buildings. And the principal there was Walter Dunham at Gatelot at the time. And Walter, when this whole process of becoming a school district occurred, recruited him as one of the teachers. And those early years were kind of crazy still because even though it had become a centralized school district, it didn't have the building space yet. So you had, of course, Gate Lot there, but you had Parsnip Pond School. You had the annex building of Lake Ronkonkoma Methodist Church, which was converted. They added a downstairs to it, according to my mom, and so they could put classes in there. They stuck classes wherever they could fit them while they were in the process of starting to build buildings in order to service the community.
And so the Methodist Church, which faces the lake, faces south.
Yes,
that's still there today. It's obviously been there for over 100 years. That you're saying the basement of that church was a Sachem used classroom at the time.
Well, maybe the basement of the church was. I'm not sure, but I certainly know that the annex building right next to the church,
next to
was, was originally just, according to my mom, was just one floor. And when Sachem took it over, they invested money because they needed more classroom space, and they finished off the basement space. It's now still used as a nursery school.
And the other, it is, yeah. And it's, again, facing right next to the lake. The other Parsnip Pond schoolhouse, in fact, there's the road right there across from what is Parsnip's Pub is Schoolhouse Road.
Right.
For the folks that have no idea what we're talking about, but may have heard about these things, where was this Parsnip school building? What was that?
I don't know exactly where it was, but I know there was also a building up closer towards where the mall is now that was used also as a school building. So there was a lot of different stuff going on there. And here's one of the sad things about, progress is things get plowed down or built over and redone. And, things like, I'll mention later when we're talking about my dad, Sachem's first track, well, yes, there's a track there now, but the first track was not where it is currently. And it was, that's a whole story in itself. But, things have changed. Those areas that were fields, the areas that were farms. I know certain fields and parks were used for the early sports programs in the area. Now, of course, the Sachem fields were all constructed and reconstructed, of course, when they took down the tennis court hill and redid all the fields. But, things change.
Yeah, things evolve. That's why I love those historic markers all over the place to remind people, oh, this happened here. It might have been 200 years ago, but at least we remember it. Yeah. So you grow up in a house with a father who's a teacher and coach, and one of the first teachers and coaches in Sachem history. Obviously, that had an impact in your upbringing and your future. What was it like as a formidable young kid seeing that? Were you tagging along at track and field meets? Were you seeing this Sachem culture going, wow, I can't wait to run for Sachem. I can't wait to coach for Sachem. What are you thinking as a kid as you're seeing your dad do all this?
Well, what was interesting is I guess I was kind of typical of a kid in that I didn't really pay much attention to what my dad did. Yes, did I go to summer recreation because he was running that program? Yeah, I did that. He'd come home late, and I didn't even really realize that he was coaching track. The first couple of times that I really got an idea was he was coaching track was when he had coaches come in to the house and they'd sit at the dining room table and go over stuff. And, Dick Simmons, for example, who is this guy? Or somebody else that was coming into the program to assist him as a coach. And, I was a kid. I didn't really pay much attention to it. I really had no idea back then what kind of a runner that he had been during his athlete, really, not just a runner, but what kind of an athlete he was. And I just kind of found my way into the sport on my own. And, and years later, I kind of found out that my dad purposely did that. As an all-around athlete, he wanted us to find our own way and to do our own thing. He had been a great baseball player. He had been a great basketball player, then discovered track in later years and was a great track athlete. And he did not want to influence us greatly in one direction or another. And here's another strange thing about it. He never got us involved in any kind of organized sports. Now, there wasn't much in the way of organized sports back then in the early 60s, and there weren't many club sports and that kind of things. But we just played, we played baseball out in the backyard, and I pitched against a rock in my backyard, and we shot baskets, and we just played. We did a lot of tag and all of that kind of stuff, but we didn't play organized sports. So for whatever reason, my dad kind of gave us space to just find things on our own.
What were your earliest memories of watching Sachem sports, especially track and field? Do you remember going to some of those original meets as a kid? Do you remember thinking, not necessarily looking at your dad as a coach, but looking at the athletes going, I could do that. I may be able to run like that. Did that trigger anything, or was not until middle school, high school where you really found your athletic ability?
Middle school, high school. Again, just because of the way my dad was, we didn't watch sports on TV. We weren't Jets fans, Mets fans, any of that kind of stuff. We just played. We were kids that just played, and we sure did. We play sports out there, sure we did, but we didn't play any kind of organized stuff. I didn't really go to his meets. He was the breadwinner in the family, and my mom took care of us, and we would come home after school, and mom was in charge. And my dad would come home sometime later around dinner time, and then we saw dad, and it's kind of similar to what my kids experienced too. I wasn't around a lot because I was teaching and coaching, and track takes a lot of time, which then explained to me in later years when I started coaching, oh, that's why my dad wasn't around a heck of a lot. He was also involved in union affairs too at Sachem, so that took up some of his time.
And your dad's name is Robert McNeill. I want to make sure we have that documented too. Do you remember any gate lot stories? I mean, you mentioned Walter Dunham, and gate lots got its own unique history. It's the first school constructed after World War II on Long Island, and it's still there. Obviously, it's not used as a school building educational facility right now. They haven't used it in some time, but the history of that building is quite special. And that was built after what was a small 4-room schoolhouse in the Lake Ronkonkoma area, which Walter Dunham also taught at and was the principal at. Right. Before he eventually became the superintendent, the founding superintendent of Sachem. Do you have memories of Walter Dunham or of just gate lot in general as a kid?
I have memories of Miss Bianca. Later on, John Beinheimer, I think, came in while I was still going to gate lot. It was great. It was a great experience growing up in the Sachem School District. Everybody was nice. The teachers were great. The kids were great. I never remember any major conflicts, whether that was me because everything rolls off my back, or whether that was the world then. Everything seemed to be really pleasant, and I enjoyed my time there. Miss Bianca was iron fist. I remember that. But it was a good experience.
And so you get into middle school, you get to high school, start to run, start to become a student athlete yourself. You wound up graduating from Sachem in 73. By the time you graduate, you're Sachem's first county champion in cross country, first league champion in winter track, and that's as a junior. I mean, this is to again paint a picture for people that don't realize Sachem's first graduating class was 59. So we had 15 years or more of student athletes that were able to run, that were able to compete. And you're the first one to really get on that county level, opening people's eyes that, Sachem's here. By 73 into the late 70s, early 80s, Sachem became a powerhouse in literally everything. What was the scene like for you? Are you realizing that you're this dominant student athlete, or are you just going out there to run and whatever happens, happens?
Well, there's a little bit of a misconception there in that there were some top athletes certainly going through Sachem in the 60s, and some top teams also. But Sachem was a Class B school. It was not League One. My senior year is when we moved up to League One and to Class A. And that happened to be a year that we kind of, as a school, as a high school, kind of took a beating. The track programs were one of the few successful programs that year because of the level of competition really increasing at that point. But I have fond memories of starting. That was my first organized team, was to go out for cross country at the middle school level. Bill Burrows was my coach. I remember so clearly bumping into this fella who would come up to me and go, McNeill, this official. And he'd always call me McNeill and had a big smile. And he was just so generous and so nice. Who I later learned out was Don Woolley. As you know, I went up through the levels and then eventually had him as a teacher. But what a great guy. But middle school, you know, he made a big fuss over me at track meets, you know, and that was a great thing. But we had nice teams. Like I just mentioned before, Bill Burrows, cross-country coach. What a great guy, you know, really connected with the kids, and probably was one of the first coaches that influenced me in a way to learn that connection, to try to get to know the kids and connect with them, was so important. He lived out in Coram somewhere, and I remember me and a couple of the other guys on the team, riding my bikes out there to visit him one day. I have no idea whether he invited us or whether we just showed up because we wanted to go see Coach Burrows. But that was a great way to get into the sport. And then I started doing track also, and it went from there. And then eventually, you know, got involved at the high school level. Had Tom Toscano as my main coach up until my senior year, when Tom started moving into administration, and when Tom went into administration, then, you know, things changed and Kevin Spellman kind of took over the program my senior year.
At that point, did you start to think about a career in education and coaching?
I was basically pre-med bound when I was in high school. Actually, in middle school, somehow somebody got my ear and kind of convinced me I needed to have a more academic track. And at the time I was still in chorus, and the following year I dropped chorus and started taking a much more difficult academic track because I was going to become a doctor. That was where I had a lot of respect for doctors. I impressed by them and thought that would be a great career. And then when I went off to college and learned a little bit more about how much schooling I would have to take and how I'd be sitting inside buildings all the time dealing with injured or sick people. And I was an outdoor person. I grew up, like I said before, in a rural area. We were out in the woods all the time. One of our favorite games when my family moved to Washburn Street, Lake Grove, one of our favorite games that we would play all the time was this silly game called Ray. You probably have no idea what it is, but we would go out in the street and we'd be waiting for cars to come. And then we would run off and hide in the woods, try not to get hit by the rays, the headlights of the car. That's the kind of silly stuff we did growing up. We just played. It was fun. And now getting into more organized sports than in junior high and in high school, then, you know, things started to change. I became more serious, and I stopped the singing and said, okay, I'm going to be a doctor. And then I go off to college and go, no, I like playing in the woods. I like playing in the field. I like being outside. I like doing all that kind of stuff. And after my first semester of college, I switched to phys ed.
And you went to Rutgers?
I went to Rutgers, yes.
And obviously, are you running at Rutgers as well?
Yes, I went as a runner. Yes, got a partial scholarship, and that was basically my main focus at the time, that I was going to be as good a runner as I could be.
Yeah. And so after that first semester, first year or so, when you said, all right, I'm good with the pre-med stuff, do you then say, I could be outside as a coach, I could be in my home at Sachem? And when do you make that decision and then follow that path for me of getting hired? And what did you go through to get a job in the, you know, mid to late 70s?
Well, I don't think I really had aspirations of being a coach, but I was a runner, and unfortunately or fortunately got injured, seriously injured my freshman year at college. And it took me until the summer before my junior year that I was able to start running again. So my college running career kind of was curtailed quite a bit and slowed down quite a bit. And it took me until really halfway through my senior year before I started hitting my high school times and finally started to improve on my performances. So I kind of had this desire to see what I could do as a runner. Whereas most of my college teammates, and we had a great program at Rutgers at the time, number of All-Americans. One of my teammates made the Olympics in the steeplechase. And these guys were all kind of tired. They had been competing all through high school and all through college and training hard. And I didn't have that chance. So when I got out of college, my main goal was to see how good of a runner I could continue to become. So I worked real hard at that. And I did come out and immediately got a substitute teaching position at Sachem. Right away they pulled me in. Tom Toscano and I think it was Don Fenner at the time was personnel director. They contacted me way before I got out of school and said they wanted to be there, but there were no phys ed openings that year. So I went in as a substitute teacher, and halfway through the year ended up getting what was probably my favorite teaching job ever. The growth of the district was causing some buildings to be like overcrowded. And at Nokomis, they brought me in as a leave replacement for the second half of that year, being the ancillary teacher. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it basically you're covering the overload classes. So I taught art, music, physical education, and was a part-time nurse. So all of the areas that I was interested in, because I was always interested in music, always interested in art, and of course, physical education and sports. And so I got that position there as a lead replacement. The following year, again, no openings in phys ed. And meanwhile, I had started running with one of my college teammates and the team he was running with. Pat Gubbins was the teammate, and he was running with this group, Super Runner Shop. And they had just opened a store in Huntington, the first actual running store on Long Island selling running stuff. And I hooked up with them, and long story short, after they offered me a job, I debated it and discussed it with my parents. My mother said I was a nut because I went to college and I'm going to go sell shoes. And I ended up taking a detour there for a number of years where I worked there, then was a partner there at Super Runner Shop for a while and didn't return. So that was in the late 70s. I didn't return to teaching until the late 80s, mid to late 80s. And I started teaching at a private school and then eventually came back to Sachem in 89.
So there was a gap there. It wasn't that straight out of college story. You had
no. My focus then was, since I didn't get that phys ed job right away, it was, well, this really works well with my running, and I'm really enjoying the running, and I'm taking it serious, and that allowed me to experience a couple of years of great stuff, travel around the world, and some great competitions, and a lot of fun. It was great. A great group of guys that will always remain my friends.
Yeah, and you're at that point, you're full steam. I mean, you're in the Boston Marathon, you're winning the Long Island Marathon, you're running professionally. Obviously you're bringing in some income, doing some other things, and athletic equipment and sneakers and shoes, and so. But your whole world is running at that point. You were just trying to make a life out of that, and it seems like the days of Steve Prefontaine and the glorification of this sport on the American sporting culture and just on the mainstream a little bit. That's all happening at that time, right? I mean, it was running something that was getting significant coverage to the point where you're like, well, yeah, I'm an athlete, but this is cool. This makes sense. I feel like I can do this.
Sure. The running boom really hit. Frank Shorter was probably one that was very influential to start that. And the running boom, the races, the number of races out there, the number of big races, money finally started to come in the early 80s in small amounts. I was sponsored by Adidas for a while, but because I worked for Super Runner Shop, Gary Merca, my mentor and the owner of the store, winner of the first New York City Marathon, he kind of convinced me, Pete, we'll take good care of you. We don't want you to be sponsored by one particular company because then customers coming in might think you're being influenced by your sponsorship, and we want you to be, helping them out as best as possible. And what turned out to be really great is because I was not sponsored, once I dropped my sponsorship, I got invited to some really cool races, to London, to Finland for the Finland Marathon, to Bermuda a couple of times, all expenses paid to go race. What a cool thing.
Obviously, there's so many races in your lifetime, but are there one or two standout memories that will forever be that finish line moment, that thing that you've told your student athletes about? I mean, what was your defining moment as an athlete?
Ooh, that's hard to say, but to me, I've always looked at, this is one of my favorite sayings to the kids, to my own kids, my own children. This is, I say all the time, always an adventure, and good or bad, always an adventure. It makes life interesting, and certainly probably two of the cool adventures that I dealt with was the trip to Finland. Was a phenomenal adventure. I got invited to do a travel film. They invited me over, myself and a runner from California got invited to do this feature travel film for their tourism bureau or whatever it was. And so I was in Finland for a week. Halfway through the week was the Helsinki Marathon that we had to compete in. But we were flown around the country. There were 2 days that we flew to 2 different cities and were wined and dined. So I drank way too much Finlandia vodka, which was not a good thing when I was running a marathon in the middle of the week. But it was, what an adventure, going all over the country with cameras following us constantly. I got off the plane and there's cameras there, and we go to rent an Avis car and there's cameras filming us. And it was just, what an adventure that was. But another real adventure, which was just a regular race, corporate challenge in New York City, that I'll never forget. A number of my college teammates were there, and I beat them all. And in college, I was a JV guy, I was nowhere near them because I was just getting over being injured. And the women's winner was an All-American from Rutgers, who was on the team the same time as I was. She was on the girls' team the same time as I was on the guys' team. And there were, 3,000 finishers. It was covered very heavily in the newspapers because Caroline Kennedy ran in the race. That's probably why it got the press that it did. But we went up on the podium where the mayor was going to present us with our trophies. And I'll never forget, her name was Cindy Wuss, and she looked at me and she was like, "What are you doing up here?" And I won. And she was looking at me like, "But you're JV." I could see the smoke coming out of her ears, but that was a result of a couple of years of good, solid training and being healthy. That was fun, an adventure. I got a kick out of the fact that I could tell that she was very confused that I was up there on the podium.
How long did you wind up competing for? Did you still do marathons even when you're, getting older in age and settling into your own coaching career, or did you kind of stop competitively and just did it for fun at some point?
In the mid 80s, when I believe it was 83, when we opened a store out in Southampton, a super runner shop, and I was partners in that. The demands of being an owner certainly took away from some of my ability to focus on running. And my wife was, helping me with that too. And she was also teaching at the time. So both of our levels of performance started to drop off at that point, but I never stopped running throughout all those years and never stopped racing, though I wasn't quite racing at the level I was racing then, for 2 reasons. One, I wasn't doing the training and wasn't as focused on that. And 2, I was just getting older. But once I got to Sachem, and right away when I got to Sachem, Tom Sabatel calls me into his office and goes, "We could use a Pete McNeill in our track program." And sure, okay, that sounds great. And I knew right then it's really going to go downhill, because to be teaching and coaching and trying to train is really, really hard. But I did have two mentors that kind of helped me. And, a lot of people talk about these guys all the time, but Fred Vaccaro and Kenny Friedheim, they would be at school at 5 o'clock in the morning and doing their workouts. And most of the other teachers, the athletes, the students had no idea that they were that dedicated to their own fitness, as this is a way of life. Yeah, I work hard as a teacher, I work hard as a coach, but I take care of myself. And I kind of maintained that. I would get up at 4:30 every morning. I tried to get to school by 5:45, 6 o'clock at the latest, get in my own workout, and then go through my day knowing that, okay, I took care of myself. I did what I needed to do for myself. And I still do compete on occasion. What makes me happy is to be able to run in races down in Florida with my daughter. I don't race very often. I run with the kids still. I do long runs with the kids through the summer and the fall. So I maintain my fitness. I have to be in decent shape to still run with the girls, and occasionally run in a race, though I have to mention that I'm very disappointed. In the last 2 years, I haven't been able to break 20 minutes for a 5K. I ran a 20:10 this winter, and it makes me feel old that I can't break 20 minutes.
It's better than my time, I'm sure. I mean, and by the way, this is about the 15th or 16th iteration of the Sachem combo that I've done. More than half, I would say almost all, have mentioned Fred Vaccaro as really a guiding light and someone that they modeled them or tried to model themselves after, tried to model their programs after. I had dinner with him just a couple weeks ago. He's just turned 80. He still goes to the gym 6 days a week.
Yep.
He's by 6 a.m.
Of course.
Eats better than anybody, super conservative on his diet and what he's intaking. This is why he's sharp at 80 years old, and he's got another 20 years left in him, I told him. So, but it's amazing. Those guys, those old school Friedheims, the Jack Mahoneys, the Batewells, they cared, they were there, they were dedicated. The programs then became successful from that mentality. So you start coaching. At what point, if ever, did you think about building program, making sure that the student athletes were thinking and acting like you when you were running? You know, how do you start to cultivate your coaching mindset and your impact on other people? When does that really click for you?
Well, one of my other mottos is, if you're going to do something, do it right. Do it well, do it right, do the right thing. I'm asked to coach. Well, okay. Well, then I got to do the right thing. And certainly having those people around in the Sachem program, I had experienced a lot of them as a high schooler there. And now coming back 15 years later as a teacher, seeing them again, and being able to just observe them. It didn't even have to have long conversations with them. It was just observing what they were doing, what kind of program they had put together, how they interacted with the kids and the faculty, and taking. So now I had to take my sport seriously. Now, I had always been a track nerd, so I was very familiar with all the different events, and specifically the skill events. I had a reasonable background in it. As a kid, we pole vaulted in my backyard. That's something my brother Mark and myself would do. We would toss a rock in the backyard like we would throw in a shot put. And I took it seriously. And so I went to clinics, a number of different clinics I went to. I did a lot of reading, bought a lot of videotapes, so that I could watch specific things about specific technique with all the different events. And one of the great things that I had going for me, there was this great camp down in South Jersey, a weekend camp. And anytime I had an athlete come along that was pretty good at something and they needed to get better at it, well, I would go to the camp with a couple of the athletes, and that would be one of them, and I would hang out at that particular event to learn more of the specific technique of that particular event. And that camp was a great camp. It was staffed by all Olympians. So I get to say that I learned the high jump from Dwight Stones, for example. I learned sprint starts from Carl Lewis. I was there, and the camp was set up in such a way that the few coaches that were there were treated like gold. I just stood right next to Carl Lewis. I was standing right next to him, and he'd ask me, he'd say, "What do you think about that position?" Well, I think their shoulders need to be forward a little bit more. Exactly. They need to have their weight forward on those hands and get those shoulders forward. And those kind of experiences were real important to me in becoming a better coach. I even reached out to Tom Toscano some and had him come do sprint clinics and start clinics. He was a principal at the time over at Sagamore, but he was always willing to help out, and he knew more about the sprints than I did. So, I took advantage of any help I could get, including our kind of, we're known throughout the country for what event, the race walk.
That's right. We have built a factory out of the race walker talent that has come out of Sachem from, of course, Maria Michta Coffee, our Olympian, to several county champions and people that have competed at the national level. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think the average person that goes, how is this happening so consistently in such an oddball event? There's reasons for that. I mean, you guys helped cultivate that, you and Alex Young and, the Joe Coffey now and Dan Schaub, and this modern era of coaches obviously cares just as much as any other era of coaches. But I feel like the technique and the oversight has been so good with these events that we just somehow built this factory for race walkers.
Well, and it wasn't just race walkers. Part of what Alex and I did was we as part of our plan of how to put together a program, we understood that there's a limited number of coaches, 2 or 3, depending on the season. And there's all these different events. And each event is a sport in itself: long jump, pole vault, shot put, disc. They're all a sport in themselves. And so we had this understanding that we can't do it all. We need the kids to help us. So we developed a leadership-based squad program where each event had its own squad. And as kids moved through their 4 years of high school, they would go from being introduced to all the different events, where we would try to figure out where their talent lied and where their interests lied. And eventually we would throw more and more responsibility at them in that squads till when they became a senior, they had an understanding that it was their squad and they were responsible for making sure the right things were being done, and that everybody was learning and everybody was enjoying themselves and everybody was being the best that they could. And we put a lot onto the kids, those seniors, to run those particular squads. Yeah, we were up at top, kind of, trying to monitor the circus that track and field is. But it was really came down to the kids. And the first person who started that race walking squad way back, one of my early years, I think it was 1991 or 1990, she was a race walker, Erin Ingram, and she was so welcoming. What a great personality. She brought kids onto the team. She was the original person that helped build the program as far as number wise. And she was a race walker, and she formed a squad around her so that they all felt that they had this group that they were a part of. And we have maintained that throughout all of these years. We still have a great race walk squad. We just had a state champion this winter in the race walk, Abby Callanan, so it still continues. We have, kids still off in college doing great in the race walk. We have another young kid coming up, and another one, Megan Hoffman, who's moving off to Marist to race walk on the college level. So that's been our strongest program. But in all the other specialty events, we do the same kind of concept, to have a squad and have the senior leaders are the ones that are in charge.
Yeah, and it's right. You're right. Race walk gets a lot of love, but the track programs over the last 30 years because of you and Alex Young. They have been some of the best programs in the county, in the state. And you can go on and on about the All-Americans, the county champions. Really, I think most impressive too, team county championships. That's very difficult to achieve. Yet in modern times, even post-split with 2 high school programs, we've been able to capture several team county championships, especially and mostly on the women's side. That is very difficult. There are some powerhouses out there. There are student athletes that are groomed even at the sort of the Catholic school level. So you have these federation championships, and Sachem competes with the best of the best in the state. And that's a credit to you and Alex, and yes, the other coaches, but you guys have built that now for literally, almost 4 decades or whatever it is. So
right. And we've had a lot what's interesting about track and field is we've had a lot of good people come through the program as coaches. They're there for a season or 2 or 3 years. Track is a very, very demanding sport. First of all, because as I just mentioned, all the different events and all the stuff that you have to know, and the numbers of people that you're dealing with. When you're dealing with 100+ kids on a team and having to structure your workouts to keep them all busy in a positive way at practices, it's a challenging sport, and certain people hang in there for a while and make a big difference. Certainly Alex and myself were there all along. Now at East, Dan Schaub, Bart Sessa, Connor Dolan, they're doing a great job. Joe Coffey is now kind of backed off a little bit because he's got a family, and trying to find that balance is always a challenge. But there's always got to be a strong coach that's kind of holding it all together. But we've had a lot of other people that have come in and contributed, like Jamie Donnarumma, who is now Jamie Dern. There's a lot of good people that have helped out over the years.
And we'll wrap up in a few minutes. But one of the things that I always ask, especially coaches, could you define your impact and your meaning to Sachem and what you've done in your career? And you really have impacted thousands, tens of thousands of people, and it doesn't go unnoticed. Of course, you're in the Sachem Hall of Fame. Of course, you had your own track and long distance running career. But when I boil it down to why all this matters, why our school community matters, it comes down to the teachers making an impact, the coaches making an impact. How would you define that for you in all those years that you've done that?
I think one of the things that I tried to do is try to help kids understand that they were a lot more than they thought they were, that they were capable of a lot more than they thought they were capable of, that they had abilities untapped and unknown that they had to reach down to get. And I think that was part of what we were always trying to teach them, was to A, do the best they could, B, not be afraid to challenge themselves, and C, to contribute. On our track teams, one of the things that we were teaching kids is, the throwers over there are working real hard at your event. You're a distance runner. You can't throw the shot 10 feet, but you can run for a long time. That's your talent. Make use of your talent. At the same time, appreciate and respect their talent. I think the track and field world is kind of cool because, talk about inclusiveness and respecting people for different abilities and talents and whatever. That's track and field. It's like people are from different countries or of different backgrounds because they're doing something completely different, and they all need to work together to achieve things. So the contribution idea is really important too. When kids were injured, okay, how can you contribute? Well, you're doing the score sheet, or you're bringing out the med kit, or however you can contribute. Some kids contributed by great performances. And over the years, we had so many kids that contributed by leadership, by just doing the right thing. They might not have been the best athlete in the world, but they did the right thing, and that made the kid next to him do the right thing. And that kid developed into a great athlete because they had those other people around them. And hopefully kids learned more about themselves and their abilities. And, we've seen kids go on to so many cool things in their life. That's probably one of the things that I get the biggest kick out of, seeing some of them out there coaching, some of them out there as lawyers, some of them out there as doctors, some out there as great moms taking care of their kids, and that everything is only as important as you make it. And whatever it is you're doing, make it important and do it the best you can.
Well, on behalf of our alumni and our community, thanks for sharing your life and story and career with us. And thanks for your impact. And one of the all-time greats, one of the people who has really put their heart into what we are here. And you're one of the reasons why I think Sachem is a really special place to live and raise my family, right in Lake Grove, not too far from where you grew up. So any parting words, any last notes?
Well, there's a number of us red, black, and gold people out there, and certainly you are one of them too. And it really is great to see that tradition is continuing with challenging times, of course, but that we're trying to hold up that tradition of Sachem's legacy of being a community, being community oriented, and appreciating one another here in this community.
Thanks for joining me, Coach.
Thank you very much, Chris.